On a quiet autumn evening, a wealthy CEO sat alone in a luxury restaurant, staring out over the sparkling lights of New York City, until his eyes landed on a woman in worn clothes, standing on the sidewalk with four little boys, each one a mirror image of him. In that moment, everything changed. Who were they? Why didn't he know they existed for 6 long years? And could love truly return after so much time and so many mistakes? If this story touches your heart, please like the video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another powerful story about love, family, and second chances. Graham Whitaker sat alone, high above the glowing city skyline, at a table set for two in a restaurant where reservations were a privilege earned through wealth and power. The clinking of cutlery and soft jazz in the background did little to comfort the hollowness in his chest. Outside the floor-to-ceiling window, the world sparkled like a galaxy laid at his feet. Boston pulsed with life, laughter in the streets, people rushing home to families, lovers holding hands in the crisp autumn air. But Graham, he dined alone. Again. The waiter approached quietly, his polished shoes barely making a sound on the marble tile. "Will there be anything else, Mr. Whitaker?" Graham blinked out of his daze and offered a slight shake of the head. "No, that'll be all." As the waiter slipped away, Graham swirled the aged scotch in his glass. It was his usual, a 30-year-old single malt that cost more than most people's rent. He drank it not for the taste anymore, but for the ritual. It was a small comfort in a life built on calculated risks and empty victories. At 43, Graham was the CEO of Whitaker Holdings, a global powerhouse with stakes in everything from tech to textiles. His face graced magazine covers. His words moved markets. But not a single person waited for him at home. His mind wandered unbidden to Elena Monroe. Her name alone could still make his heart falter. 6 years had passed since their divorce. 6 years since he stood in their condo doorway, briefcase in hand, nodding absently as she said through tears, "You're choosing your empire. I'm choosing to live." He let her go, thinking love was a detour, a delay in the pursuit of greatness. Only now that the greatness felt meaningless. He set his glass down with a soft thud, the amber liquid inside trembling just slightly, like his hands had done that morning when he woke alone again in his penthouse. Another day, another deal, another silence. And then something caught his eye, a commotion down on the street below. He rose from his seat, stepping closer to the window. Outside, a small crowd had gathered near the corner of the block. A woman stood there, bundled in a second-hand coat, holding a cardboard sign. She knelt down to adjust the coat of a child beside her. Then another, and another. 4 small boys, identical. Graham's heart stopped. The woman turned slightly, her face half lit by the street lamp, and everything in him shattered. It was Elena, his ex-wife, on the street, with 4 children huddled beside her, children who looked exactly like him. His breath caught in his throat. The tumbler slipped from his fingers, shattering on the floor, but he barely heard it. The boys, they weren't just similar, they were him. Same dark hair, same stormy blue eyes, same sharp chin. Graham Whitaker, billionaire tycoon, could have dropped to his knees. He had sons, 4 of them, and he'd never even known. Graham didn't remember rushing down the elevator. He didn't remember tossing a $100 bill on the table or ignoring the maitre d's confused calls. He didn't feel the chill of the October wind as he burst out of the building and scanned the streets, his breath fogging in the air. All he remembered was the image, Elena, kneeling on the pavement, shielding the children from the cold with her own thin coat. And there she was, just half a block down. Adjusting the collar on one of the boys' jackets, her fingers trembling. "Elena!" he called out. She froze. Her back stiffened as she slowly turned. Their eyes met for the first time in 6 years. He saw it all in her face, shock, fear, and something he hadn't expected. Exhaustion. She instinctively pulled the boys closer to her, like a lioness shielding her cubs. "Graham," she whispered, the name falling from her lips like a memory too painful to speak aloud. The boys stared at him, wide-eyed and curious, their features unmistakably mirroring his own. One of them, the tallest by perhaps a fraction of an inch, stepped forward. His chin lifted in a defiant way that made Graham's heart twist. "Are you okay, Mommy?" the boy asked softly. never taking his eyes off Graham. "I'm fine, Noah," Elena said gently, running a hand through the boy's hair. "This is just an old friend." But Graham didn't look at her. He was still staring at the children. "They're mine," he said, his voice cracking. It wasn't a question. Elena's face hardened. "We should talk somewhere else." Graham took a step forward, but her eyes warned him to move slowly. He nodded. "How old are they?" he asked anyway, his throat dry. "5," she said barely above a whisper. 5. That meant she had been pregnant when they signed the divorce papers. While he was popping champagne for another record quarter, she was carrying their sons. Alone. "Why didn't you tell me?" The words came out harsh, almost accusatory. Elena didn't answer. One of the younger boys tugged at her sleeve. "Mommy, I'm hungry," he said, his voice barely audible. The statement hit Graham like a punch to the gut. He'd just left behind a filet mignon and a bottle of scotch that could pay someone's rent for a month, and his children were hungry. "Come with me," he said, voice softening. "All of you, please." Elena hesitated. He could see the storm behind her eyes, pride, suspicion, the instinct to protect. Her eyes flicked to the boys, then back to him. "Just dinner," she said finally, her voice flat. "Then we'll talk." Graham nodded quickly. "Just dinner." They walked in silence for 2 blocks. Graham had started toward the lavish steakhouse on the corner before Elena's subtle shake of the head redirected him to a cozy family diner nestled beneath a brick awning. She didn't need to say anything. He understood. Inside, the boys took seats in a corner booth, the worn vinyl squeaking under their small bodies. They stared wide-eyed at the laminated menus while Graham sat across from them, his nerves strung tighter than they'd ever been in a boardroom sitting. "Noah, Eli, Aiden, and Miles," Elena said quietly, pointing to each boy in turn. "These are your names," she added, more to Graham than the children. He nodded slowly, repeating the names in his head like a sacred mantra. They ordered spaghetti and meatballs. All 4 boys attacked the plates with hunger that made Graham's chest ache. Elena barely touched her food, her eyes flicking between Graham and the children like a hawk. "They're good eaters," Graham said awkwardly, trying to fill the silence. "They've had practice," she replied dryly, a small, weary smile tugging at her lips despite herself. Noah, the eldest, watched Graham warily. Eli eyed his expensive watch. Aiden hummed softly to himself between bites. And Miles simply stared. Finally he spoke. "You look like us." Graham's heart stuttered. "I guess I do," he said softly. Elena cleared her throat. "Boys, how about some ice cream?" The promise of dessert was enough to temporarily shift their focus. As the waitress took their orders and disappeared, Elena leaned in. "I'll take them to the fish tank by the entrance," she whispered. 5 minutes, then we talk." He watched them go, his sons, his heart, which had been locked behind the steel doors for years, cracked open in silence. Elena returned alone and slid into the booth across from him. Her face was pale, lined with fatigue, but her eyes were sharp. "Ask what you need to ask," she said. "When did you know you were pregnant?" 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized. Graham rubbed a hand over his face. "And you didn't think I deserved to know?" "I called 3 times. Your assistant said you were too busy for personal calls." His mouth went dry. That had been during the Hong Kong acquisition. His assistant had orders to filter everything. "I never got those messages." "Would it have made a difference?" she asked, her tone not accusatory, just tired. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I should have had the chance." Elena looked down at her folded hands. "When I found out they were quadruplets, I panicked. I had no job, no support. My parents helped at first, but after they died in that car crash, it was just me. I had no time, no resources, no choice but to move from shelter to shelter." Graham swallowed hard. "You could have called again." "I was angry and scared, and part of me thought, if you were too busy then, you'd be too busy now." He closed his eyes. The words hurt because they were true. "They're mine, Elena. I lost 5 years." "And whose fault is that?" There was silence between them, broken only by the distant clatter of plates and the soft giggles of their children at the aquarium. "I want to know them," Graham said finally. "All of them. I want to be their father." Elena studied him for a long moment. Her expression softened, just slightly. "This isn't about writing checks." "I know. Before either could say more, the boys returned, cheeks flushed, fingers sticky from half-melted ice cream. "We should go," Elena said, gathering their jackets. "Tomorrow," Graham said quickly. "Let me see them tomorrow, please." Elena looked down at the boys, then back up at him. "We'll see," she said quietly. As they turned to leave, Miles lagged behind. He looked up at Graham with those same stormy blue eyes and lifted his hand in a tiny wave. "Bye," he said softly. Graham knelt down, his heart aching. "Goodbye, Miles. I'll see you soon." Graham arrived at the entrance of Boston Common nearly an hour early. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been so nervous. Not during his first IPO, not even when giving a keynote speech to international investors. But this was different. This was personal. The stone path near the old Bethesda fountain glistened faintly with dew. The trees wore their autumn coats, leaves golden and red, fluttering in the wind like nature's confetti. For the first time in years, Graham noticed the crunch of gravel beneath his polished shoes. He noticed the way the light shimmered off the water. He was seeing the world with new eyes, and then he saw them. 5 figures approached from the east path. Elena, in a simple blue sweater and jeans, her brown hair pulled back loosely. The boys ran ahead in matching jackets, a blur of energy and little legs. "You came," he said when they reached him. "I promised we would," Elena replied, offering a tentative smile. The boys clustered around her, half curious, half shy. Noah stood protectively in front of the others, his posture stiff and guarded. Eli adjusted his tiny glasses and stared at Graham like a scientist examining a new species. Aiden bounced on the balls of his feet, clearly eager for some fun, and Miles tilted his head, observing Graham with the same calm, unreadable expression as always. "You can call me Graham," he said, crouching to their level, "or Max, if that's easier." "Are you rich?" Eli asked bluntly, nodding at Graham's watch. "Eli," Elena hissed, but Graham laughed. "Yes," he said, "I am." "Is that the most important thing about you?" Aiden asked, his voice curious. The question hit him like a wave. For years, Graham would have said yes without hesitation. His wealth defined him, until now. "I'm still figuring that out," he admitted. "Maybe you guys can help me." That seemed to satisfy them, at least for the moment. "What would you like to do today?" he asked. "Boats," Aiden shouted, pointing to the lake. "Carousel," Eli added. "Ice cream," Miles whispered. "The zoo has tigers," Noah said solemnly. Elena smiled. "They rarely agree on anything." "Then we'll do it all," Graham declared. "We've got the whole afternoon." And they did. They rented a rowboat, Graham rowing awkwardly while the boys pointed at ducks and argued over who got to steer. Aiden nearly tipped them twice. Graham's $4,000 loafers were soaked, and he didn't care. They rode the carousel, each child choosing a different animal. Graham stood beside Elena, watching the children spin like little galaxies. "They're happy," he said. "They're resilient," she corrected. "We've had some hard years, but they find joy everywhere." He looked at her then, not just as the woman he had once loved, but as the woman who had raised their sons with strength, grace, and sacrifice. "What happened, Elena?" he asked quietly. "I thought you were working at that design firm." "I was," she said, her gaze never leaving the boys. "After the divorce, I managed okay for a while. My parents helped with the babies. But when they died, I lost my support. I couldn't afford daycare and work full-time. I lost the job, then the apartment. We've been in shelters, libraries, churches, wherever we could stay warm." Graham felt a deep ache unfurl in his chest. All this had happened while he'd been closing deals, dining on rooftop patios, and sipping imported wine. "Why didn't you contact me again?" he asked softly. "Pride," she said, "anger. Fear you'd try to control everything like you always did with the company." He didn't argue, because she was right. The carousel slowed, the boys returned, breathless and glowing. "Ice cream," Miles reminded them with grave importance. As they walked to a nearby cart, Graham felt something warm press into his hand. Miles. The boy's small fingers curled around Graham's. No hesitation, no question, just trust. "I like your tie," Miles said. "Blue is my favorite color." Graham swallowed hard. "Mine too." They found a bench and sat with their cones. The air was cool now, the sky turning amber. "Do you have kids?" Eli asked between licks. Graham looked at Elena, who gave the faintest nod. No, he said carefully. Not before now. That's sad, Aiden said. Everyone should have kids. They're fun. Graham laughed. I'm beginning to think you're right. When the time came to leave, the boys pouted but didn't protest. Can we see him again? Aiden asked Elena. She glanced at Graham. We'll see. I'd like that, Graham said. As they turned to go, Noah paused, his small face serious. Thanks for the ice cream, he said, holding out his hand. Graham took it gently. Thank you for today. As they disappeared down the path, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves. Graham remained on the bench long after they'd gone, holding his tie where Miles had touched it. For the first time in decades, he wasn't thinking about mergers or stock prices. He was thinking about 4 boys with blue wasons and the father he wanted to become. The following morning, Graham sat behind his massive mahogany desk at the top floor of Whitaker Holdings headquarters. A panoramic view of the city stretched out before him. Glass towers, endless motion, the heartbeat of finance. But the spreadsheets blinking on his screen may as well have been ancient hieroglyphics. His mind wasn't here. It was on 4 little boys. A sharp knock broke his concentration before the door swung open uninvited. Russell Whitaker stepped in. Identical in face but not in demeanor, Russell exuded sharpness in every sense. Where Graham moved with quiet calculation, Russell stormed with impatience and precision. His tailored suit was immaculate, his cufflinks glinting with disapproval. You missed the Tokyo call, Russell said, not bothering with hello. Lee asked for you specifically. I had to make excuses. Graham looked up slowly. Something came up. Something? Russell scoffed. It was an 8-figure deal, Graham. Graham leaned back, folding his hands. Yes, but I had something more important. That stopped Russell. For the first time in years, the 2 men stared at each other without the shared rhythm of business between them. You're not sick, are you? Russell asked, genuine concern flickering across his features. No, Graham replied. I saw Elena yesterday. Russell stiffened. Your ex? Graham nodded. With 4 boys. Russell raised an eyebrow. She has kids? They're mine, Russ, Graham said. Identical quadruplets, 5 years old. Same eyes, same jawline. They're me at that age. Russell's face shifted from disbelief to blank caution. She told you that? She didn't have to, Graham replied. I saw them. Russell began pacing the office. Even if that's true, why now? She vanishes for 6 years and then suddenly appears on a street corner, just as your net worth spikes again. It's too convenient. She didn't find me, Graham said sharply. I found her. She wasn't even looking for help. She was just surviving. Russell turned, his jaw tightening. And you believe that? After 6 years, she just appears with 4 lookalikes. And you want to play house? They're my sons. Get a DNA test. I will. Russell's expression softened just slightly. Good, because if they're yours, we'll do right by them. Set up trust funds, schooling, support. But Graham, don't let guilt rewrite history. Graham's voice was low. This isn't about guilt. This is about them. Russell sighed. You're chasing a ghost. Be careful. You don't get to just step into a family and erase 6 years. I'm not erasing anything, Graham said. I'm starting from where I am, with what I have. 2 days later, the results arrived. Graham sat at his desk again, the envelope in his hand. He didn't need it. His heart had known the truth from the moment Miles took his hand in the park. Still, he opened it. Paternity confirmed. 99.999% match. Russell walked in moments later, unannounced as always. Graham silently handed him the paper. Russell scanned the page. Well, he muttered, congratulations, you're the father of 4. Graham nodded once, his voice firm. This isn't about child support or trust funds. I'm going to be their father. In every sense. Russell raised a brow. You've known them for what? A few days? I've known myself for 43 years, Graham said quietly. And for the first time, I'm beginning to understand what I was missing. Russell exhaled. What about the Singapore project, the expansion in Tokyo, the shareholders? They'll manage. You built this empire. And it's still here, but it's not all I want anymore. Russell studied his brother. You're really doing this? I already have. That weekend, Graham met Elena and the boys at the Boston Children's Museum. The place was a flurry of color and sound, holograms, interactive exhibits, tiny feet running wild. The kind of chaos Graham once would have avoided at all costs. But now, he moved through it like a man discovering a lost world. At the weather station, Aiden created miniature tornadoes. At the robot exhibit, Eli asked about gears and circuits. At the construction zone, Noah directed his brothers like a foreman. Miles, quiet, curious Miles, watched it all with the stillness of someone who felt everything deeply. Elena walked beside Graham, arms crossed, eyes observant. "They're adjusting to you faster than I expected," she said. "I'm adjusting faster than I expected," he replied with a sheepish smile. She looked at him, a touch of surprise in her eyes. "They're good boys." "They're extraordinary," Graham said, meaning every word. Miles appeared beside him. "You frown when you think," the boy said softly. Graham blinked. "I do?" Miles furrowed his brow in imitation. "Like this," Graham laughed, caught off guard by the accuracy. "You're right, my father used to do that too." "You have a father?" Miles asked, amazed. "I did," Graham said. "He passed away when I was younger. He was very focused, like me." "Was he nice?" The question hollowed Graham's chest. "He tried to be," Graham said, "but I want to be better." Miles nodded solemnly. "Good." The museum closed far too soon. As they left, Graham bent down to meet the boys at eye level. "Would you like to come back another day?" he asked. "Dinosaurs next time," Eli exclaimed. "Can we ride the boats again?" Aiden added. "Will you really come?" Noah asked. "Or are you just being nice because of Mom?" The honesty of the question knocked the air out of Graham's lungs. He looked Noah straight in the eye. "I'm not going anywhere." "Pinky promise?" Noah asked. Graham held out his little finger. "Pinky promise." The boy linked his pinky with Graham's, sealing a contract far more sacred than anything signed in his office. It had been nearly 3 weeks since that first encounter by the fountain. 3 weeks since Graham Whitaker's life quietly shifted course. The man who once lived by a rigid schedule and a fortress of priorities had started ignoring boardroom calls just to hear his sons argue over what kind of dinosaur had the biggest teeth. Graham now carried a sticky note in his wallet. Not stock tips, not market data, but 4 names written in blocky handwriting on a napkin. Noah, Eli, Aiden, Miles. He had them memorized, of course, but still the note stayed with him like a compass. That afternoon he arrived at a quiet park in Cambridge, where Elena had agreed to meet him with the boys after their preschool program. The trees rustled gently overhead, and sunlight dappled the grass like paint spilled from heaven. From a distance, he spotted them. Noah and Aiden were racing up the jungle gym, Eli hung upside down from a metal bar, and Miles sat under a tree, carefully observing a line of ants. Elena stood nearby, arms folded, watching everything like a silent sentry. Graham approached with measured steps. "Hey." Elena turned. Her expression was guarded, but not cold. "They've been asking about you all day," she said. "Eli said he wants to show you his new trick. You've apparently been upgraded to VIP status." Graham smiled, and for a moment, so did she. As he knelt beside Eli, who was preparing to demonstrate a complicated spin off the monkey bars, Graham felt something shift in the air. Something subtle. It wasn't just about showing up anymore. It was about being trusted. That evening, after a round of playground games and a meltdown over a lost sneaker, Elena surprised him. "Would you like to stay for dinner?" she asked, brushing her hair behind her ear. "We were going to do mac and cheese and frozen veggies." Graham blinked. "I'd love to." Elena's apartment was small but clean. Toys were tucked into labeled bins, and colorful drawings plastered the fridge. The dining table wobbled slightly, and the couch had a tear in the corner. But it was the kind of home that smelled like childhood and effort and survival. The boys tossed their shoes in a pile and ran to the kitchen, arguing over who got to stir the pot. "You can grate the cheese," Elena told Graham with a smirk. "No pressure, but they're very particular." He rolled up his sleeves and got to work, surprising even himself when he didn't ruin the task. "You're surprisingly domestic," she teased. "I watched a YouTube video on how to boil water," he replied with a grin. They cooked side by side, the way they once shared space in a boardroom, only now it was different, softer, lighter. During dinner, the boys chattered nonstop. I built a Lego castle taller than Eli, Aiden bragged. No, he didn't, Eli countered. It was the wind. Miles quietly pushed green beans around his plate. Noah helped a kid today at recess, Elena added. He gave up his turn on the swing. Noah blushed and stuffed his mouth with pasta. After dinner, Graham offered to read bedtime stories. The boys scrambled to pick the right book. He read from a tattered copy of Where the Wild Things Are. Each boy curled against him like puzzle pieces. By the final page, Miles had dozed off against his arm. Elena entered quietly, watching from the doorway. She didn't say anything as she began tucking the boys in. Graham helped, learning who liked their blanket folded just so, and who needed 2 kisses, not 1. When the boys were asleep, the 2 adults returned to the living room. You've done this before, she said softly. I haven't, he replied, but I want to, every day. She studied him for a long moment. I can't promise anything, Graham. This isn't just a phase. They need stability. They need someone who doesn't disappear. I won't disappear. Elijah asked yesterday if you'd still come, even if it rained. Graham's voice tightened. I'll come in the rain, in the snow, in a hurricane. She nodded slowly. Then we'll try. Co-parenting, a real partnership. If you're serious. I'm more than serious, he said. This is the most real thing I've ever done. She gave him a look, not of romance, but of quiet understanding. Then we start here. That night, Graham returned to his penthouse, sat on the edge of his king-size bed, and stared at the silence. He missed the noise, the sticky hands, the cereal crumbs, the questions about dinosaurs. He pulled out the napkin from his wallet, now wrinkled and soft at the corners. He read the names again, aloud like a prayer. And then he added a 5th name, Elena, at the bottom, not because she needed rescuing, but because she had been the one who rescued their boys when he didn't even know they existed. He wasn't just building a new life, he was learning how to live. The sky over Boston was gray that morning, low clouds hanging like a lid over the city skyline. Graham stood in front of his closet, ignoring the buzz of his phone on the dresser. He was supposed to be in a car by now, en route to the Whitaker Holdings quarterly board meeting, a critical session on the company's expansion into Singapore. But today wasn't about Singapore. Today was about Miles, his youngest, quietest son. Today was the kindergarten art showcase, and Miles had whispered about it all week, how he hoped his picture would be displayed near the door so Graham could see it first. I drew us, he had said softly, eyes full of hope. All of us. Graham buttoned his shirt, slowly, thoughtfully. He had built a global empire, but he'd never been drawn by a child before. The elementary school was a modest red brick building tucked on a side street in East Cambridge. A banner that read, Art is where the heart speaks, hung over the entrance. Inside, the smell of construction paper, crayons, and graham crackers lingered in the air. Elena greeted him in the hallway holding a cup of coffee. You came, she said, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. Of course I did, Graham said, adjusting his tie. She leaned in, lowering her voice. He's been checking the door since 8 a.m. They entered the multi-purpose room together. The walls were lined with art. Rainbows, rocket ships, abstract blobs of glitter and glue. Parents stood in clusters, admiring stick figures and papier-mâché sculptures. But Graham's eyes were drawn instantly to a large sheet of white poster board near the entrance. 5 stick figures, 4 small, 1 tall. Each had messy black hair and sky blue eyes. At the bottom in bold crayon letters was written, My Family, by Miles Monroe. And beneath it a single word, Dad. Graham's throat closed. He couldn't speak. He couldn't breathe. Elena stepped beside him and gently touched his arm. He said you should be the tall one, because you're strong enough to carry everyone when they're tired. Graham swallowed hard and blinked fast. When Miles spotted them, he ran over, beaming with pride. You found it, he exclaimed. Graham knelt down and pulled him into a hug. It's perfect, he said, voice cracking. From the corner of his eye, Graham saw Russell enter the room, impeccably dressed, as always. He scanned the room, found Graham, and frowned. They met outside in the hallway a few minutes later. You missed the board meeting, Russell said sharply. The investors noticed. I was busy, Graham replied calmly. With this? Russell gestured toward the kindergarten hallway lined with scribbles. We're not running a daycare, Graham. We're running an empire. No, Graham said softly. I was running an empire. Now I'm raising a family. You can't do both, Russell snapped. You can't have Singapore in sandbox time. Maybe not, Graham admitted, but I'd rather miss a meeting than miss my son's picture of me hanging on a school wall. Russell stared at him, incredulous. You've changed. Graham met his gaze. That's the point. That evening, Graham sat with Miles in the living room of Elena's apartment. The boy was curled into his side, quietly coloring another picture. This one of a spaceship with 5 little astronauts. I'm taking this one to your house, Miles said matter-of-factly, so you don't forget. Graham ruffled his hair. I could never forget you. From the kitchen, Elena watched them. Later, as she handed Graham his coat, she spoke softly. You chose him over the boardroom today. I choose him every day, Graham said, and he meant it, because in that one drawing with 5 smiling stick figures and a single bold word, Dad, Graham had found more legacy than any balance sheet could ever offer. Saturday morning arrived wrapped in golden autumn light. Leaves danced in the crisp breeze as Graham waited near the conservatory garden in Central Park. Elena's suggestion. A quiet, familiar place where the boys felt safe. Where truth, she said, could land softly. His hands were slightly clammy despite the cool air. He paced the grass, watching for them, rehearsing 100 ways to begin the conversation. How do you tell 4 children that the man they've been calling Max is actually their father? And then, there they were. Elena walked beside the boys as they ran ahead in matching jackets. Noah clutching a frisbee, Eli holding a book, Aiden bouncing a soccer ball between his feet, and Miles trailing quietly behind with his arms full of snacks and a plush dinosaur. Graham knelt to greet them, opening his arms wide. Max, Aiden shouted, launching into a hug. Did you bring snacks? Eli asked hopefully. I think we brought more, Miles whispered, holding out a crumpled bag of crackers. After a few minutes of playing and laughing, Elena gathered them near a picnic blanket beneath a tall oak tree. We need to talk about something important, she said gently, her voice calm but firm. The boys exchanged glances, sensing the shift in energy. Elena sat down beside Graham, then patted the blanket. Come sit with us, please. Just for a minute. Noah sat with folded arms, always the sentinel. Eli leaned against Graham's side, curious as ever. Aiden wiggled in place, barely containing his usual energy. And Miles sat cross-legged, unusually still. Elena took a breath. Remember how you've all asked me about your dad before? About why you don't have one like some of your friends? 4 small heads nodded slowly. Everyone has a dad, Eli murmured, even if we haven't met him. You're right, Graham said, his voice soft and warm. And the truth is, you've known your dad this whole time. There was a pause. Then Miles, small and solemn, looked up at him. Is it you? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Graham nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. Yes, Miles, it's me. I'm your father. Silence fell like a snowfall. Eli blinked rapidly. Aiden tilted his head. Noah's lips pressed into a thin line. Miles simply stared, wide-eyed. I didn't know about you until recently, Graham continued. If I would have been there from the very beginning. Elena's voice joined his, quiet and steady. I didn't tell him. That was my mistake. I thought I was protecting you. But now we both want to be honest, with you and with each other. Eli spoke first. That's why we look the same. Aiden leaned forward, his eyes wide. Does this mean you live with us now? Graham smiled gently. Not yet, but I'll be around. As much as you want me to be. I'm not going anywhere. Noah was still quiet, his gaze steady and searching. Why didn't you find us sooner? He asked, his voice edged with something older than his years. Graham nodded solemnly. Because I didn't know you were out there, but I'm here now, and I will never stop showing up. There was a long pause. Then Miles crawled across the blanket and wrapped his arms around Graham's neck. I knew you were something special, he said simply. Eli and Aiden followed, tumbling into Graham's lap in a pile of limbs and hugs. Only Noah remained. He stood up and walked a few paces away, staring at the water. Graham moved to follow, but paused when Elena touched his arm. Let me, she whispered. She joined her son at the edge of the grass. I know this is a lot, she said. I'm not mad, Noah said, eyes still fixed on the fountain. I've seen men be nice to you before, and then disappear. I don't want my brothers to be sad if he leaves too. Elena's eyes glistened. I understand, but I don't think he's going anywhere. Not this time. Noah was quiet for a moment. Then he turned and walked back toward Graham, slow and careful. If you're really our dad, he said, stopping just in front of him, that means forever, not just for Saturdays. Graham knelt to his level. Forever, he promised, extending his pinky. Noah studied him for a long moment, then slowly, deliberately hooked his finger around Graham's. Okay, he whispered, you can stay. One of the five of them, Graham, Elena, and four boys with matching blue eyes, sat under the tree for a long time after that. No need for more words, just presence, just peace. When it was time to leave, Aiden tugged Graham's sleeve. Can we call you Dad now? He asked eagerly. Graham's voice trembled. I'd like that very much. Graham's penthouse was beginning to feel too quiet. The sleek, expansive windows, the modern furniture, the glass staircase, all of it once felt like success. Now it felt like distance, like something was always missing. So he changed his mornings. Instead of checking stock updates over imported coffee, he now poured orange juice into 5 mismatched cups on Elena's scratch kitchen table. Instead of chauffeur rides to board meetings, he walked the boys to school hand in hand, taking the long way through the park when the leaves were falling just right. He didn't miss the old rhythms. Because now, when he opened his phone, he wasn't looking for market numbers. He was looking for texts like, Miles, I drawed you again, Daddy, with a dog. We don't have a dog. Eli, can you come to our library today? I want to show you the volcano books. Noah, I helped Aiden with math. He said I'm the boss. Is that okay? Aiden, bring cookies, chocolate, and juice boxes. He adjusted his work schedule, at first just a little, then a lot. The executive team grumbled. Russell scowled. But Graham didn't care. He was showing up for the things that mattered. One evening as he helped Elena with dinner, his specialty, garlic bread from the freezer, he noticed how tired her eyes looked. You're doing too much, he said gently, watching her stir the sauce on the stove. I've always done too much, she replied, her voice soft but without resentment. He leaned against the counter. What if you didn't have to? She raised an eyebrow. Are you offering me garlic bread or a life plan? He smiled. Both. That weekend, Graham introduced her to the owner of a respected design firm in Boston, a former client, now a friend. Elena had once been an exceptional designer, and the spark in her eyes reignited when she walked through the office. 3 days later, she got the call. They offered me the job, she told Graham, stunned. Senior project designer, with flexibility. Graham beamed. Because you deserve it. They celebrated with pizza on paper plates and root beer floats with the boys. Aiden spilled his all over the rug. Nobody got mad. 2 weeks later, Graham handed Elena an envelope over breakfast. What's this? She asked, cautiously opening it. Just a new lease, Dwight said, on a new apartment. 2 bedrooms for the boys, close to a great school. It's in your name. She stared at the paper. Graham, I'm not trying to buy anything, he said quietly. Just giving my family what they deserve. There was a long pause. Then she reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Thank you. One night after the boys were tucked in, 4 small lumps beneath cartoon blankets, Graham and Elena sat on the tiny balcony of her old apartment. The city buzzed in the distance, but their world felt still. You're different now, she said. Am I? He asked quietly. Yes, she replied. Before, everything was about control. The perfect deal, the perfect future. Now you pause. You listen. I think I had to lose everything, he said, to realize what I really wanted. And what's that? He looked at her, eyes soft in the moonlight. You, them, mornings with cereal and juice boxes, soccer games, bedtime stories, a life. She didn't respond at first, but she didn't pull away either. Instead, she leaned her head against his shoulder. Let's build something slow this time, she said. Something that doesn't fall when the wind blows. Graham nodded. I've got all the time in the world. The day Russell Whitaker finally met the boys, the sky was overcast, as if Boston itself was holding its breath. Graham had invited him to the small townhouse backyard he'd recently purchased in Brookline, a modest, tree-lined neighborhood just a few blocks from Elena's new apartment. The house was nothing like the cold penthouse Graham once considered home. There were bikes leaning against the porch, crayon drawings already on the fridge, a basketball hoop in the driveway. "You're really doing this," Russell muttered as he walked through the backyard gate, crisp suit completely at odds with the homemade Welcome Uncle Russ banner that Aiden and Eli had taped to the fence. "I really am," Graham said. Russell glanced at the four boys, who were engaged in what could only be described as an epic lightsaber battle with foam noodles. "I hope those aren't regulation weapons," Russell deadpanned. "Highly illegal in the Galactic Senate," Eli replied without missing a beat. Russell blinked. Graham grinned. "That's Eli." Russell nodded slowly. "He's sharp." "And the bossy one is Noah," Graham said. "Looks like you when you were 10, Russell noted, "which is unfortunate for him." Graham laughed. "Aiden's the blur over there in the red shirt, and Miles is the one sitting by the flower beds drawing the whole thing." Russell's gaze shifted. "He's sketching the lightsaber fight?" "Nope," Graham said. "He's sketching you." Russell turned slowly. Sure enough, Miles sat cross-legged on the ground, tongue between his teeth, intensely focused on his drawing pad. Every few seconds, he looked up and studied Russell with scientific precision. Russell tilted his head. "That's mildly unsettling." "It means he likes you," Graham said, hiding a smile. Miles stood up and walked over, holding out the sketch silently. It was rough but charming. A tall man in a suit surrounded by four small boys with foam noodles and ridiculous grins. "You look serious," Miles said, "like a detective or a magician." Russell took the paper, glanced at Graham, and knelt down with a rare gentleness. "I'm not a magician," he said, "but I know a few tricks." "Show us," Aiden shouted, instantly abandoning his noodle and sprinting over. The others followed. Within 5 minutes, Russell was seated on a lawn chair, pulling coins from behind ears, producing a deck of cards from his inner pocket, and somehow making Eli's sock disappear. Noah crossed his arms, skeptical. "Is that even possible?" Russell raised an eyebrow. "Want me to teach you how?" Noah's face lit up, even as he tried to act unimpressed. "Maybe." That evening, after the boys had gone inside for snacks and cartoons, Graham and Russell sat on the back steps, sipping coffee. "They like you," Graham said. "They're not bad," Russell replied. "Eli nearly conned me into promising him stock in Whitaker Holdings. Kid's 5. Graham smiled, then turned serious. "I'm glad you came." Russell took a long breath. "I still think this is a risk, Graham. You gave up a lot. I gained more." Russell studied his twin brother, really looked at him. The weight that had always lived in Graham's shoulders, that endless hunger for achievement, seemed quieter, grounded. "I didn't expect this," Russell admitted. "You, them, any of it." "I didn't either," Graham said, "but I can't imagine life without them now." Russell nodded slowly. "They'll need a strong uncle," Graham added. Russell raised an eyebrow. "You saying you need my help?" "I'm saying I'd like it." There was a long pause. Then Russell smirked. "Fine. But I'm not changing diapers. And if Eli asked me to co-sign a loan, I'm calling a lawyer." Graham laughed deeply and freely. As they stood to head inside, Miles peeked out the screen door. "Uncle Russell?" he called out. Russell turned. "Yeah, kid? Can you come back next weekend?" Russell hesitated just a second, then gave the smallest, realest nod. "I'll be here." The backyard of Graham's new townhouse had never seen so much color. Streamers twisted from the fence posts. Bright balloons bobbed lazily in the breeze. A homemade banner, painted by the boys themselves, flapped proudly in the wind. "Happy 6th birthday, Noah, Eli, Aiden, and Miles." Each of their names was spelled in a different color, with handprints scattered around like confetti. Graham stood at the grill in a ridiculous apron that read, "Number 1 Dad," flipping burgers while keeping one eye on the boys. Noah was leading a kickball match like a seasoned coach, complete with hand signals and strategy. Eli sat at the science table conducting baking soda volcano experiments for a wide-eyed audience of neighborhood kids. Aiden had convinced 3 adults to join him in a chaotic game of tag. And Miles? Miles sat under a shady tree with his sketchbook, capturing the whole thing in careful lines and colors. Elena walked over with a tray of condiments, in a rare moment of stillness in her eyes. "They're having the time of their lives," she said, watching their sons with soft affection. "They deserve it," Graham replied. "They deserve everything." She looked up at him. So do you. Before he could answer, Russell strolled over with an armful of gift bags. Just so we're clear, he announced, I tried to limit it to educational toys. But Eli may have strong-armed me into something that lights up and possibly makes sound. He's persuasive, Elena chuckled. He's dangerous, Russell corrected. I may end up working for him one day. You say that like it's a bad thing, Graham grinned. Russell handed the bags to Elena and leaned in slightly. Wesley, sorry, Eli told me I'm his second favorite grown-up now. Second? Graham asked. Who's first? Russell gestured toward Graham's ridiculous apron. The guy in the chef hat. Graham laughed and handed him the spatula. Your turn, Uncle Russell. The party unfolded like a dream. There were games, face painting, and a magician who looked genuinely overwhelmed by Aiden's constant questions. The cake, shaped like a spaceship with 4 stick-figure astronauts, was wheeled out as the children gathered around. Each boy had his own candle. 4 little flames danced against the late afternoon sun. Graham stood behind them, one hand on Noah's shoulder, the other resting on Miles's back. Make a wish, Elena whispered. The boys exchanged glances, one of those silent sibling communications parents never quite understand, then blew out the candles together. Laughter erupted, cheers, applause, and Graham felt it again, that quiet click inside his chest, like a puzzle piece falling into place. After most of the guests had gone and the sun had dipped behind the houses, Graham and Elena sat on the back steps, watching the boys play with their new toys, some loud, some messy, all cherished. You know, Elena said, resting her head on his shoulder, a year ago today, I was wrapping dollar store toys in paper from the recycling bin. Graham didn't say anything. He just gently wrapped his arm around her. You've given them more than just toys, Graham, she continued. You've given them stability, a father, a future. He turned toward her, voice low. I couldn't have done any of it without you. You carried them, raised them, loved them. I still do. There was a pause. So do I, he said. From the edge of the yard, Noah called out, Mom, Dad, come see what Miles drew. Graham blinked, stunned for just a moment by the word, Dad. He looked at Elena, who was already rising with a smile. They crossed the grass together to where Miles held up his drawing. It was the whole family, himself, his brothers, Elena, Graham, and Uncle Russell, mid-magic trick, pulling a rabbit from a hat. You even got my tie right, Russell muttered behind them. That's terrifying. Graham laughed. Elena kissed Miles on the forehead, and in that backyard, under the fairy lights and fading sky, something unspoken passed between all of them. A sense of wholeness, of belonging, of a future that no longer needed to be imagined. It was already here. The party had long since quieted. The sky had turned a deep indigo, and the fairy lights strung across the backyard flickered gently like sleepy stars. The boys were inside, curled up on the living room rug with popcorn bowls and a worn copy of The Iron Giant playing on the TV. Their laughter drifted through the screen door in bursts, pure, unfiltered joy. Graham stood on the porch watching the glow from inside, arms folded loosely across his chest. His world was no longer measured in quarterly earnings or global acquisitions. It was in the sound of small feet running down hallways, in shared giggles over spilled cereal, in the smell of crayon wax and peanut butter, and in her presence. Elena stepped out beside him holding 2 mugs of tea. She handed one to him without a word and leaned against the railing. They'll sleep hard tonight, she said softly, gazing into the darkened yard. 6 is exhausting. He smiled. You make it look easy. She gave a short laugh. There's nothing easy about it, but it's worth every moment. They stood in silence for a while, sipping tea, watching shadows dance across the grass. Then Graham turned to her. Elena, he said, voice low, steady. Can I ask you something? Not about the boys. She looked at him, brow furrowed but open. Of course. I know we've been co-parenting, and I know it's been working. But I keep thinking about how we've changed, you and me. Her expression softened. I see you now in ways I didn't before, he continued. Back then, I was blind to everything but ambition. I thought I was building a legacy, but really, I was just running. Away from something I didn't have the courage to stay and grow. Elena didn't interrupt. She just listened. And now, Graham went on, I come home to drawings on my fridge. I tie little shoes. I read bedtime stories. And I've memorized the names of every dinosaur, thanks to Aiden. And somewhere in the middle of all that, I realized this isn't just about fatherhood. It's about us. She looked down at her mug. I'm not asking you to pick up where we left off, Graham said quickly. That place is long gone. I'm asking if we could start somewhere new, as partners, as a family. Elena let the silence stretch, not out of hesitation, but care. Do you remember what I told you the day I left? She asked finally. Graham nodded. You said I wanted an empire. You just wanted a life. She turned to face him fully, eyes shimmering in the porch light. Well, Shah, she said, you've built one, and this time it has Lego pieces and chocolate milk in it. He laughed gently. I'm scared, she admitted. Not of you, but of hoping too much. He reached for her hand, not urgently, but quietly, letting her decide. I'll show up every day, he whispered, not to fix everything, but to be here for you, for them, for us. She didn't answer with words. Instead, she placed her mug on the railing and leaned forward, resting her forehead lightly against his. I think, she said softly, I'd like to try. Graham's eyes closed, relief, gratitude, wonder. They all rose like a tide inside him. The porch light flickered gently above them. Inside, laughter burst again from the living room, and then Miles's voice called out sleepily, Mom, Dad, the robot is hugging the boy. Elena smiled into the quiet. Just like us, she whispered. The Whitaker Monroe house wasn't built for quiet, not with 4 6-year-old boys charging through its narrow hallways, their voices bouncing off the walls like pinballs of laughter and questions, and occasional cries of, he touched my sock, or it's my turn. But in all the chaos, there was a rhythm, a beautiful, messy, imperfect rhythm. At 6:42 a.m., the usual stampede began. Aiden was the first to leap from his bunk bed, his hair sticking out in 5 directions as he yelled, Toast! With jam! Double jam! Like a boy on a life-or-death mission. Next came Eli, clutching his favorite science book, already halfway through a sentence. Did you know the sun is made of plasma and, Dad, are you listening? The sun is like 10,000 degrees. Noah followed quieter, more thoughtful. He lingered in the hallway, holding his toothbrush like a sword, already mentally reviewing his day's responsibilities. Take care of Miles, check that Eli didn't sneak candy into his lunchbox, and make sure his math homework didn't mysteriously disappear again. And then there was Miles, always the last to wake, always the one to wander into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes, dragging his sketch pad behind him, and saying in the softest morning voice, Do we have the good cereal today? Graham was already in the kitchen by then, one slipper on, the other lost under the table, flipping pancakes with one hand while texting his assistant with the other. He wore a tie, not a designer tie, not a silk Hermes tie, a blue one, with tiny cartoon dinosaurs, a gift from the boys. He never left home without it now. Breakfast was a whirlwind of syrup, spills, negotiations over juice boxes, and philosophical debates over whether pancakes were better than waffles, because waffles have built-in syrup pockets. Elena moved around the kitchen with ease, and grace honed from years of single parenting, brushing Aiden's hair with one hand and refilling coffee with the other. She wore faded jeans and a green sweater that Graham always thought made her look like springtime. She stopped beside him, leaning in to whisper, You're out of coffee filters again, Mr. Executive. Then it's clearly time for a board meeting, Graham replied, giving her a wink. Their hands touched briefly on the countertop and stayed. After the morning mayhem, after the rush of toothbrushes and mismatched socks and last-minute folder checks, the family spilled out the front door in layers of movement and laughter. Graham walked the boys to school most days now. He liked the feel of their small hands in his, liked how Eli always walked 2 steps ahead like a professor, and Aiden always tried to jump and land on every crack in the sidewalk. Noah kept pace beside him, asking questions about life, fairness, and whether 6-year-olds could legally start businesses. And Miles simply held his hand the whole way without saying much. Dad, Miles asked one morning, tugging his sleeve, when we grow up, will you still walk us to school? Graham crouched to his level, heart tight. I'll walk you anywhere you want to go, he said, even if you're 80. Miles grinned and nodded solemnly. The evenings were different now, too. Instead of international calls, Graham took part in spelling drills and pillow fights. Instead of scanning quarterly reports, he scanned the boys' drawings and school assignments taped to the refrigerator, one of which had a stick figure family labeled me, my brothers, Mom, Dad, and Uncle Russell with his magic hat. Russell, for all his early cynicism, had become a fixture in their home. He showed up with educational board games and investment starter kits, complete with fake money and a fake Wall Street journal. And despite his gruff demeanor, he had been spotted once, just once, building Lego towers with Miles on the living room floor. "You're raising them like a CEO raises a startup," Russell muttered one day, "except messier and louder." Graham just smiled. Best investment I ever made. One chilly Saturday night, after the boys were asleep and the house finally quieted, Graham and Elena curled up on the living room couch, wrapped in a shared blanket, their legs tangled, the TV glowing softly in the background. They were watching nothing in particular. It was just background comfort. What really mattered was the way her head fit against his shoulder and the way his fingers absent-mindedly traced patterns on her arm. "This is it, isn't it?" Elena whispered. He looked down. "What is?" "The life, the one I used to dream of. It's not grand, it's not perfect, but it's good. It's honest. It's ours." Graham kissed the top of her head. "I used to chase everything," he said. "Power, money, control. I thought if I had enough, I'd finally feel full." "And do you?" she asked. He looked around the room at the crayon marks on the wall, the mismatched socks on the floor, the sound of Miles snoring from down the hall. "Yes," he said, "more than I ever thought possible." Sunday morning came with sunlight pouring through the windows and the smell of banana muffins in the oven. The boys had decided to throw a family breakfast party, their own invention. Everyone had to wear paper hats and pick a song to dance to while setting the table. Eli chose classical music, of course. Aiden picked a superhero theme. Noah insisted on silence while organizing forks. And Miles, he chose no music at all. He just stood on a chair, watching his family from a distance, sketching what he saw. Graham laughing, Elena pouring syrup, Russell being roped into cutting fruit, and four boys with joyful faces. In the corner of his paper, Miles wrote, "This is what love looks like." Graham taped the picture to the fridge, right beside his son's spelling quiz, right beside a handprint turkey and a lopsided drawing of a house. This wasn't the life he had planned, but it was the life he had been made for. And for the first time in forever, he wasn't chasing the world. He was living in it, right here, with them, with her, with love.